It's a great pleasure to welcome Urna. Again, we would like to thank her for putting in all the efforts. And so we'll start with Urna's lecture on non-equilibrium response theory.
Thank you, Abhishek and Sanjeev, for inviting me to this prestigious school. I attended the first 3 of them, and it's a great pleasure for me to actually lecturing in this school. So I'll now try to share my screen. Okay, so the topic of this set of lectures is fluctuations and response in non-equilibrium. So I'll briefly say what I plan to do over the next 5 lectures. So I'll just introduce what we mean by response theory and what its goals are. And then today's lecture will be totally on equilibrium linear response theory. And tomorrow and day after it will be non-equilibrium. I'll introduce dynamical ensembles and path integral formalism and see how we can develop systematically a theory for non-equilibrium, response for non-equilibrium systems. And then we will discuss a bit about nonlinear response and coarse-grained pictures. Okay, so what is response? By response we mean, just the English word, we mean the reaction of a system to some external stimulus. So there are various examples that we see every day around us. For example, if we exert a mechanical force on some particle, then it starts to move, which is quantified by something called mobility. Or suppose we have a system of charged particles, then an electric field is applied to it, then there is some current, which is the response of the system. Or if it's a collection of spins, we can introduce a magnetic field, which results in some magnetization, which is again a response to this magnetic field. Or another example which you are all familiar with, if we connect a conducting piece of metal or conducting piece of rod to 2 different thermal reservoirs at different temperatures across the system, then heat starts to flow. So this is another example of a response. So of course we are talking about in a statmech sense. So the systems are in contact with some environment. There is energy and particle exchange with the environment. So there are fluctuations in the system. The response is not deterministic. And the question is whether there is any way to predict statistically the response of the system in such scenario. So again, there are various examples that all of you are probably familiar with. First thing is Fourier law, which predicts thermal conductivity when there is a temperature gradient across the system. And there is Curie law, which was discovered like 150 years ago, which talks about how magnetization is changing when we put a magnetic field. And then there is Einstein relation which relates diffusion with mobility. So basically response theory is a unifying formalism which collects all these examples together and develops a theory which applies to all these various kinds of scenarios. So let's make the question more precise. So we have a system prepared in some initial condition. The initial condition can be equilibrium, non-equilibrium, some specific, whatever you choose. And then some perturbation is added at some time t equal to 0. So this perturbation can be a potential, it can be a field, it can be a boundary drive, it can be, whatever you choose, some change in some parameter. That's what we call perturbation. And throughout this set of lectures, we will characterize this potential with, this perturbation with some strength epsilon, which is a dimensionless number. So this is our small parameter, and we'll characterize linear or non-linear or whatever the order of response with this number epsilon. So by response, we mean change in the expectation of some observable O. Again, this observable can be anything. It can be position, momentum, velocity, spin, magnetization. So the goal of the response theory is to predict the change in this observable. So can you see if I move? Is there a way to do a cursor kind of thing?
Yeah, there should. So if you're.
So if I want to point something on the screen.
I think if you exit the maybe full screen, then you might be able to.
Okay. So that's a bit complicated. Okay, I'll just go like that. So we have some observable, and it's changing with time, of course, when we start the perturbation. So response theory predicts the change at some time t, starting from time t equal to 0. So OT, what I have written here, OT in epsilon is the perturb value, after some time t, after the perturbation is introduced. And this change, if the perturbation is small enough, then we expect that this change is linear in epsilon. And there is a proportionality constant, of course, which is called susceptibility, which is denoted as chi. So as I said, the goal of linear response theory is to predict how this chi t depends on the system properties, how it changes with the various kinds of perturbations. So let's just go through once more what are the various scenarios that can happen. So one thing is, of course, the initial condition. The system initially can be in equilibrium or non-equilibrium. And the perturbation can, of course, also be time dependent or constant, or I mean, various different kinds of protocol possible. And then another scenario is that we prepare a non-equilibrium system and then just let it relax. And after some time, it of course relaxes to equilibrium. So if we started from some non-equilibrium which is close to equilibrium, I mean some small deviation, then of course also it falls into the scenario of response. So in all these cases, so we expect the response to depend on the particular protocol we are perturbing it with, the observable we are looking at, and of course also the initial condition. So let's first take the simplest scenario, which is the linear response around equilibrium. So we have an equilibrium system at some temperature T, and the state of the system, the configuration of the system is, I'll just use the letter X to characterize the configuration, but it doesn't mean that it's a single variable. It can be a position of one particle, it can be a position and velocity of a collection of particles, it can be a full Ising spin configuration, it can be anything. So it's just a simple way to denote the configuration of the whole system. And in equilibrium, we can also, of course, talk about energy. So there is some energy in the system, which is characterized by some Hamiltonian, which I will call H naught. And again, since we are in equilibrium at some temperature T, so we know that the distribution of the states is given by a Gibbs-Boltzmann distribution. So this I'll denote by rho naught. So rho naught x is proportional to exponential minus beta H naught x. Beta is my inverse temperature, 1 by T. So throughout this talk, I'll use Boltzmann constant KB equal to 1, just for notational simplicity. So we know the initial distribution of the configuration. So each configuration occurs with some probability according to the energy of this configuration. And now we add some small potential perturbation. So we change the Hamiltonian by some amount, which is proportional to epsilon, and then epsilon Hs Vx. So Vx is my perturbing potential, and Hs is some arbitrary time dependent function which is modulating this perturbation, and epsilon is, as before, it's a dimensionless constant just to characterize the order of the perturbation. So the question is, what is the response of this system? And if we can devise a generalized theory for that. So let's first talk about static response. So the perturbation is time independent, some constant strength, and we are looking at some observable OT. So by OT, I of course mean O of some of xt. So the value of the observable at some configuration x at time t. So for when the perturbation is not switched on, so before t equal to 0, this average is given by the expectation value of this observable is an average over the equilibrium distribution rho naught. So it's a sum over all configurations rho naught x O x. So if you can see in this picture, so we have an equilibrium scenario before t equal to 0. So the average, I mean the expectation value is constant, and then at t equal to 0, we switch on the perturbation. So the expectation value starts to change, and then if the potential is not, if it is still normalizable at long time t after we switch on the perturbation, we expect again a stationary value, a constant value that this observable is reaching. So the static response is actually characterizing the difference of this long time perturbed value and the value that it had before the perturbation was switched on. So the difference in this picture, if you can see, so the static value before the perturbation was switched on and the static value after the perturbation is switched on. So this is how we define. So in the t going to infinity limit, OT minus O at time 0. Yes. So this we can of course figure out just from the Boltzmann weight. So after a large time, again assuming that the perturbing potential is still normalizable, so we expect that the probability weights for a configuration x is given by rho epsilon. I denote it by rho epsilon x, which is simply exponential minus beta x normalized by the partition function. And the expectation value is then just a sum over this new probability distribution. And then we can simply expand rho epsilon in terms of epsilon to write this O average after putting on the perturbation and expanding in a series, Taylor series in epsilon. And this is the form we get. So O epsilon is O0 plus epsilon beta times some correlation. This correlation is a correlation between the perturbing. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So this correlation is a correlation between the perturbing potential and the observable that we are measuring. So VO in equilibrium minus V average and O average. So the remarkable thing is that the response is actually given by a correlation in the unperturbed equilibrium state. So this is our static perturbation. So I'll just take a pause, and if you have any question so far, if the question is, I mean, let's take an Ising model at some temperature T, which we assume that it's higher than the critical temperature. So the Hamiltonian is of course linear, I mean the nearest neighbor SI-SJ kind of interaction, and then we as a perturbation add a magnetic field, which is added as a term H sum over SI in the Hamiltonian. So magnetization M. Okay, so magnetization M, the global magnetization, is just the sum over all spins. So in the paramagnetic phase, M average without any magnetic field is of course 0. So we are asking what happens when we switch on this magnetic field, and what is the resulting magnetization. So we just apply the formula we saw before. We have, so our perturbing potential is simply M. So we have minus HM, and we are looking at the response of M. So M with the magnetic field switch on, it's simply beta M square. This you already know probably as Curie law. And we can also ask what is the change in the local magnetization at some site K, and it is again given by some correlation of SK, SJ in the unperturbed state. So the point is that the static perturbation we can write in terms of some correlation in the unperturbed equilibrium state. So we will take another example, which is a single particle in a confining potential. Some confining potential Ux, we don't know the form of it, but the Hamiltonian is half mv square, so we have the kinetic energy and some potential energy Ux. And again, we perturb with some constant amplitude Vx. And change in average position, we can write as a correlation of the position and Vx. And we can also ask what is the change in average velocity, which is Vvx minus V naught, I mean V average 0. But we know that the new state is also in equilibrium, so V average has to be 0. Okay, so yes. Now let's go to a more dynamic scenario. So we saw that this expectation value of O, starting from t equal to 0, it changes with time, and then only it reaches this static value. So more general question is that how, what is the change in, I mean, how can we predict that the OT as a function of time? And of course, the perturbation could have been time dependent. Then it becomes essential that we know how to deal with the dynamical picture. And in general, a response at time t, we expect it to depend on the perturbation from time t equal to 0 to t. I mean, the whole history should change. I mean, decide what happens to the response. And in some cases, it may not even have static limit. So if we have a periodic time periodic function of I mean, time periodic force or something like that. So we need to we need to know about time evolution of the system. So the first answer to such questions, how the response.
Unnati,
Yes.
Unnati,
Yes.
can I ask a question?
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
In that example you showed, like the magnetic system.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens there at the critical point? Because the
Of course, at the critical point, there is a singularity. So linear response is we cannot really talk about linear responses there. So I mean, throughout these lectures, we will assume that the system is in a regime where we can, I mean, everything is regular, and we can talk about linear responses. Near critical point, we cannot talk about linear because there are critical exponents.
And this formula is true in paramagnetic and ferromagnetic phase, any of the two phases.
Within, yeah, deep within the. But in
Okay, thank you.
ferromagnetic case, of course, average, there is an average magnetization also without the perturbation.
Yeah, but in presence of H, there will be no.
Yeah. But in the ferromagnetic phase, even without H, there is a magnetization. So this
Yes, yes,
equation M0 is 0 will not be true anymore.
yes. Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So yes. Okay, so the first sort of answer to the time evolution of a perturbed observable was given by Onsager in 1931. It's called Onsager's regression hypothesis, which said that the relaxation of macroscopic non-equilibrium disturbances is governed by the same laws as the regression of spontaneous microscopic fluctuations in an equilibrium system. So you see it already connects non-equilibrium relaxation with equilibrium fluctuations. So here the scenario is that you have prepared a system in some non-equilibrium state, and then if left alone, it relaxes to equilibrium. So this regression hypothesis is saying that how it relaxes to equilibrium is actually following the same laws as how equilibrium fluctuations itself relaxes in time. So there is of course a more mathematical formulation of it. But I just want to mention that this is a predecessor of the fluctuation dissipation theorem that we are going to study next. And for that, it was like 20 years before formally the fluctuation dissipation theorem was proved. In this lecture, we'll use the more modern formalism. We'll not talk about starting from non-equilibrium as such. We'll start from equilibrium. Our perturbation would be starting at time t equal to 0, which is taking it out of equilibrium. And this way we are going to discuss and prove the fluctuation dissipation theorem. So let's move to the more formal scenario. So we consider a time dependent perturbation added at time t equal to 0, and initially our system is in equilibrium as before. And so for this part of the lectures, we'll always consider this form of perturbation. So Hamiltonian, there was an unperturbed Hamiltonian, and we add some perturbation with a possibly time dependent modulation and some potential Vx, and then that makes the whole Hamiltonian of course time dependent. And so response of some observable at time t, which is OT minus O0, O0 is a constant, is given by some time integral, as we expect that the response at time t of course depends on the whole history. So so this integral over the time dependent prefactor h's and something RTS called response function. It depends on t and s, and we integrate over s. So the fluctuation dissipation theorem says that this response function is given by this form. It's beta, inverse temperature of the equilibrium bath that we already had, and then DDS. DDS is the change with the shorter, the smaller time. Vs OT. S is my smaller time. So Vs is the perturbing potential at time s. Vs, by Vs I always mean V of xs, the configuration x at time x, and O of t, O of xt. So the observable at time t and the perturbing potential at some previous time, how it changes with time, that gives us our response function. So this is a correlation measured in equilibrium. So again we see that the response is expressed in terms of some time correlation now in the equilibrium system. So this was proved formally by Callan and Wilton in 1951, and then Kubo, Green-Kubo, etc. There are various formulations. So I'll just take one more quick break if there's any question regarding the form of this expression.
Why is the name dissipation there?
Yes, we are coming to that. So that's the first point of the next slide. So when we put some perturbation, then of course we put some energy in the system, and then I'm sorry, just a second. Yes. So when we add some perturbation, then of course we are putting some energy in the system, and that energy is being dissipated in the bath that the system is connected to. So the left-hand side talks about this dissipation, while the right-hand side talks about fluctuations in the equilibrium system. So this the formula connects dissipation in presence of drive with the equilibrium fluctuations, and we will actually see more precise way to, more precise examples where we can see this connection more clearly. Okay, so originally this relation was derived for Hamiltonian dynamics itself, but it actually has much wider validity. And one more thing I'd like to mention is that if the perturbation is time independent, so H is equal to 1, then it takes an even simpler form. So we have to correlate the observable at time t with just with the change in energy by the perturbing potential. Okay, so this correlation of course can be expressed in various other forms. So because we are in stationary equilibrium, so we expect that this correlation depends only on the time difference. So we can just shift. So it's V0 OT minus S. So that way we know that the response function is also a function of t minus S only, just the difference of 2 times. And again, because this can be written as in terms of 0 and t minus S, so the dds derivative with respect to smaller time can be replaced as minus ddt. And in fact, we can even write it as a function of single variable tau, which is just the difference, and in terms of dd tau. So we will perhaps see some specific forms later. So to apply this formula to specific systems, of course we need to define the system, and the dynamics is needed. So what I'll do is that I'll illustrate with some examples first, some examples of stochastic Markov processes, and 2 particular examples that are, probably all of you are familiar with is random walk on a 1D lattice, which is a jump process, stochastic jump process, and particle in thermal bath, which is a diffusive system. So we need to introduce this stochastic dynamics. So let's first talk about random walk. So it's a continuous time random walk. We have a lattice size from 1 to L. So the boundaries are open boundary, and there is one particle moving on this lattice. So it can jump towards its right neighbor with some rate p, which means that during some small time dt, the probability of jump is p dt, and it can jump with some rate q to the left. At the boundaries, of course, at the left boundary, it can only jump to the right, and right boundary, it can only jump to the left. So I have chosen this example of a finite lattice because we want to talk about equilibrium, and it should be normalized, etc. So we have these jump rates p and q. So when p is equal to q, there is no bias in the system, and we don't have any potential. So it's okay, when p is equal to q, it is equilibrium, and because there is no potential, all the positions are equally likely. So this is our initial condition. Now we perturb with a linear potential minus epsilon Vx, which is minus epsilon x simply. And because we want the dynamics such that at late times, the system will go to the equilibrium distribution with this potential. That gives us how this p and q should be related with epsilon. So it's simply p over q is exponential beta epsilon. So is it clear why these rates? Okay, so yes, so we will see that later when there is no detailed balance, even then one can actually write the rates in this form, but that's for tomorrow. So now we have a random walk, equilibrium, and we add a linear potential, and we want to see how the position of the particle is changing. So our observable is simply equal to x. And we apply the fluctuation dissipation theorem. So we have xt with the perturbation as x0 plus epsilon beta. So xt minus x0 is simply our vt minus v0, if you remember this form. So we had vt minus v0 correlated with the observable. So here we have xt minus x0 correlated with our xt. And actually, if we recast it in terms of the displacement, instead of the instantaneous position, if we look at the displacement from time 0, so it's just xt minus x0, which is sort of a time integrated current. So this equation can be recast as Jt in epsilon as epsilon beta by 2 J square in equilibrium. So this is actually an example of Green-Kubo relation where we have a current which is generated by a perturbation, and that is given by the variance of the same current in equilibrium. So please notice this factor half, because this makes it different from the Kubo formula. Here we did not have any half. I mean, they are of course equivalent, but this is more formally known as Green-Kubo relation. Okay, so now we come to the second example, which is a single particle in a heat bath. So for that we have to write the dynamic. Yes.
So, but in that equation, like, can you go to the previous slide? In the right hand side, this current won't be zero at equilibrium.
No, we have square. Is the variance of the current.
Oh, okay.
Right. On an average, it will be zero, of course, but on trajectory level, no. It fluctuates. There is noise in the system, right?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So so particle in a heat bath, and so we have to. So we are considering a single particle in contact with the thermal bath, which is giving the temperature T. So thermal bath is of course a big collection of particles. So this particle, our tag particle, which we are just tracking, this I mean collides with all these bath particles. But we are writing an effective equation for this for our single particle, and we assume that all the time scales in the bath is very fast. So in effect, we can actually write a single equation for this particle, and the effect of the bath is introduced through two terms. One is the diffusion. One is the dissipation, another is the noise. So what happens when a particle is moving in bath is it's colliding, so it's also losing energy. And particularly if it moves fast, if the velocity is higher, then of course it loses more energy. So this is the dissipation term. Gamma is the coefficient of friction. So when it collides, it loses energy, and then of course it is also being bombarded by other particles. So it's also getting some energy from the bath, and that is given by this white noise. I mean, this is an idealistic assumption, which is this eta t. Eta t is a white noise. So the full equation is that we have x double dot, usual Newtonian kind of term, acceleration. I am putting m equal to 1 throughout, and then we have a force coming from some potential ux, and then two terms coming from the bath. So dissipation and noise. So it can be shown. So I am not going into the derivation right now, that this noise and dissipation, they actually have to be related because of some internal consistency. So that's why you see that the coefficient of friction gamma also appears here in the prefactor of the noise. So this is an accepted model of a thermal bath with some temperature T, and you can actually convince yourself that if you drop the friction term, you can, I mean, very easily convince yourself. So if there is no friction term, then the system will not equilibrate. You will see that its energy goes on increasing. We don't want that. We want dynamics which lets the particle relax to equilibrium without any external drive. So this equation guarantees that at late time, the particle actually relaxes to an equilibrium given by a distribution exponential minus beta ux plus exponential, I mean, beta by 2 mv square. Again, kb is equal to 1 throughout. Otherwise, we'll have a factor of kb here. So yeah, so let's talk a bit about this noise eta t if you're not familiar with it. So this is a random force coming from the bath particles. So on an average, this is 0. There is no systematic force from all these collisions. So eta t is 0, and then eta t prime, which is the autocorrelation of the noise. So ideally, we assume that the bath is relaxing so fast that there is no time correlation left in the bath. So this eta t prime is a delta correlation. I mean, just a Dirac delta function of t minus t prime. So the noise is correlated with itself only at the same time, and there is no other correlation. So yeah, I forgot to mention. So this relation that the amplitude of the noise is related to the friction, that is called Einstein relation. So this we will just assume for now. We will take it for granted that a single particle moving in a thermal bath is the dynamics of such a particle is effectively described by such a Langevin equation. Okay, so as I said, the equilibrium distribution, so we have position and the velocity of the particle that characterizes its state at any moment. And in equilibrium, the distribution is just this, gives Boltzmann distribution. Now we are perturbing with again linear potential, that's the simplest case, which means that there's a constant force epsilon acting on the particle. And we can write the change in the average velocity, which is just x dot t average, which was 0 in equilibrium. So to linear order fluctuation dissipation theorem, we just apply it here. We can directly write. So dds of course makes it vs. So vt is given by a correlation of two time correlations of the velocity itself in equilibrium. So once again, we are talking about what is the velocity that is being generated by adding an external force, adding a constant force epsilon. And Cooper formula is saying that we don't actually have to apply this perturbation to know this velocity. We can just predict if we know the two time correlations of the velocity variable in equilibrium. Okay, so I'll just once more pause. And is it clear what we are talking about? Okay, I guess it is. Okay, so let's take a special case where the particle is free. So there is no potential on it. So the equation is just this. And in this case, we can actually solve the equations formally, and we can also, I'll just show how this, until now we have been talking about fluctuation dissipation theorem just as a theorem. We took it for granted. So here we'll see how it actually works, and it actually does work. So as I said before, so we have eta t, white noise, average 0, correlation is delta. So this equation, because now it's a linear differential equation, first order, we can solve it formally. So V0 is the initial velocity at time t equal to 0, gamma is the friction, and then this is coming from the force. So this Vt is in the presence of this epsilon. And now we can take average, and this V0 average is of course 0, because at time t equal to 0 we were in equilibrium, there is no overall drift, and eta average is 0, epsilon is constant. So Vt average is it can be written as an integral in this form. So this integral of course we can just do directly, and we have a form for this Vt average in presence of the perturbation, which is proportional to epsilon of course, and 1 over gamma times some time dependent factor. Okay, so this is with the perturbation. Now of course we can also compute the right hand side, the Vt-Vs correlation. We can again solve similarly just the linear equation, but now there is no epsilon, but there is eta t. And now since we are talking about 2-point correlation, eta t we know that has a 2-point correlation, even though it's delta function. So we have V0 square, and then okay, we are talking about Vt-Vs. So the cross terms with V0 and eta tau are of course 0, because eta tau average is 0, and it's uncorrelated with V0. So we have V0 square average, and this is simply the temperature, because again we are starting from equilibrium. So V0 square is simply just temperature. This is nothing but equipartition, Kb equal to 1, remember. And then this next term, this integral you can do. If you have any question, you can ask later. But now, for now, this integral can be done, and we see that this has the same form as what we had in the previous this thing. So this is a direct verification of fluctuation dissipation theorem in a very simple context. We have one particle in contact with the thermal bath at temperature T. There is no potential, and we are adding a constant force, and we really explicitly verified the fluctuation dissipation theorem. Okay, so since this had some calculations, so I'll pause again. If it's not clear, just don't hesitate to ask. Yes, I see one raised hand.
Am I audible?
Yes.
I have a question. If we consider a hard particle, does the fluctuation dissipation theorem hold for does the fluctuation dissipation theorem hold like what you have showed for a free particle?
Yes, it holds. Yes.
Okay.
But of course, the explicit forms will be different as long as.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. There are other raised hands.
Hi, Una.
Yes.
Should we consider the response theory that you described so far as the constraint for constructing the microscopic equation, just like Langevin equation, or can we consider them as something independent?
Okay, so in some sense, yes, because this relation that we said that the friction and noise, they are related. This is also a form of fluctuation dissipation theorem, which is called second fluctuation dissipation theorem. But so far we have not talked about that. So far, I mean, the way we are going now, it is not a constant. So once you have the bath dynamics from some, I mean, if we assume that the bath dynamics is given by this, then the response theory is something added. It's not a constant.
So if we start to consider some, so response theory doesn't have to be truncated in the linear order, but we can continue to the high orders.
Sure, yes. So we will actually see later how to do that. But for now, we are just talking about linear.
So in such case, we have to add more terms in this equation to satisfy the constraint, right?
Okay, so yes, so that is actually it's not a very simple question. So usually what is done, so what you will see is that, so the Langevin equation is by definition a linear equation. So you are talking about how to derive Langevin when there is a large force?
Well, I'm asking question related to formulating the kind of Langevin equation, but considering.
Yes. So what we will do is that we will so that is actually a difficult question. So what we will do is that we will always consider so when we talk about nonlinear response, our perturbation will always be linear. So this you will later see. So we will always be in the format that Hamiltonian is actually added with a linear term. So we have this H is H naught plus epsilon something. So in some sense, we are adding a linear perturbation, and we can see what is the nonlinear effect of that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So actually, I don't know the precise answer of your question, and if we actually have second order terms, how it changes things. So you will see later that this assumption that we are taking, that linear perturbation, that leads to a physical scenario which says that the entropy generated by the perturbation is always linear in perturbation. So we will restrict to the scenario when this is always true. So there is no second order term in entropy. It will become much more clearer tomorrow. So your question, actually, I don't know the answer. If you actually, I mean, formally you can of course add epsilon square term and try to see what happens there. That you can always do. But whether that is physical or what physical system it describes, this I don't know. Let me think a bit more about it, and then maybe tomorrow I can answer more.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so there was one more question. There was another raised hand, or should I wait, or?
Maybe continue with this.
Okay. Yes. Okay, so as an application of this illustration that we had, we'll just derive Einstein relation. So we are talking about the change in velocity. So we add a force, and it generates the velocity of the particle. Yes. So this proportionality constant with the force amplitude, this is called mobility. So at large time, the particle starts to move with a constant velocity proportional to epsilon, and this proportionality constant, as we saw from here, so here we had this expression. So if we take t going to infinity, we have epsilon over gamma. So mobility is just 1 by gamma. On the other hand, in equilibrium, the position of the particle, so there is no force, the position of the particle diffuses, and at late times we expect that x square is proportional to t with some constant d, which we call diffusion constant. So formally we define the diffusion constant d as limit t going to infinity x square over 2t, and this of course we can calculate as a double integral of vs prime correlation. And then, so we just calculated vs prime, we know how to do this, and if we explicitly calculate this, we'll see that d is given by t over gamma, which is mu t. So this relation is called Einstein relation, or sometimes Einstein-Sutherland relation. This you see that directly relates fluctuation with dissipation. So gamma is the dissipation, a measure of the dissipation, how much the particle dissipates energy, and d is the fluctuation of the position. So this answers also your question, Prashant, that I mean you see an explicit example where this relation is actually relating fluctuation with the dissipation in a precise context. Okay, so we will take one more example, which is the overdamped diffusion. So in the case when the damping is very large, the friction is very large, we can actually drop the acceleration term off, and we have first order equation. So in general, physically, this is true when gamma t is much larger than 1. But in this regime, we can write the equation as though there is no acceleration term. So this is called an overdamped diffusion, and I mean, probably many of you already are familiar with such equations. And we are talking about perturbing with a constant force again this particle. So here you see that the force is proportional to velocity instead of acceleration, and this eta is still white noise, gamma and I mean the prefactor of eta, they are still related, everything is same. So we have just dropped off the x double dot term. So here, because there is no velocity, the equilibrium distribution is just given by the potential energy exponential minus beta ux, and once more we can write the change in the average position with I mean as an effect of this perturbing force, and this form you see is again given by xt minus x0 whole square in equilibrium. So remember that this form is very similar to what we had in random walk case, and actually we'll see that or maybe many of you already know that overdamped diffusion and random walk are very similar to each other in structure. So this concludes the examples. Now we'll go to a more formal derivation of FDT, but I'll continue using overdamped diffusion as a standby example, and we'll just do it in the context of overdamped diffusion. So of course there's a lot, I mean many different ways to derive. What we'll use is the so-called generator approach, which acts on observables. So let's see what I mean by generator. So we have some system, and the time evolution of, so rho xt is the probability that the system is in configuration x. Remember that I mean generally it can be position, velocity, collection, anything. In the context of overdamped particle, single overdamped particle, this is just the position. So the time evolution is given by the master equation or Fokker-Planck equation. For Langevin, it's Fokker-Planck. For a jump process, it's master equation. But the general form is this. So we have d rho dt. It's a linear equation. Then some operator L, which is either the Markov matrix or Fokker-Planck operator. It can be, I mean, in the second case, it's a differential operator, which acts on rho. And to find the probability at time t, we have to solve this equation. So for overdamped diffusion, from Langevin equation, one can write this L dagger. So I'm calling this L dagger because we'll see in a moment why I'm calling this L dagger. So for overdamped diffusion, so now you see I have written mu directly as and 1 over gamma. I've gotten rid of gamma and replaced it by mu. So this is the form of L dagger. You don't really need to remember the explicit form, but just to know that it's a second order differential operator. Okay. So because we want to derive the fluctuation dissipation relation, which is in terms of a correlation of observables. So it's better to work in a picture where we see directly the observables evolving. Okay, so we have this formal solution of probability distribution, which is e to the power L dagger t. So I'm assuming that L dagger is time independent. So this is the linear equation. You can solve formally just this in terms of rho x0, which is the initial distribution. In our case, it's the equilibrium distribution. Okay, so observable value, expectation of observable value at time t is just an integral over x, integral or sum depending on your phase space, over this rho xt, which we write as exponential L dagger t in terms of rho x0, initial distribution. Now, what we can do is that we can introduce an adjoint operator of this L dagger, which if we, pull this e to the power L dagger t acting on OT, it becomes the adjoint. That's by definition the adjoint. So this e to the power LT operates on O, and the distribution is just the initial distribution. So now, so first thing is that this adjoint is called the backward generator, and you see that this OT average can be written as and expectation in the initial distribution just over rho x0. Here you see we just have rho x0. So e to the power LT operating on O average over the initial distribution. Okay, so this is how an operator evolves. So if it helps, you can think of this as a equivalent to the Heisenberg picture in quantum mechanics. So we have an operator which operates on the observable. Okay, so this L is called backward generator because in some sense this is pulling back the observable to time t equal to 0 and taking average in the time t equal to 0 distribution. So for overtime diffusion, we can just find the adjoint of this L dagger, and this basically just has a minus sign for the drift term, and the temperature term remains same. Okay, so is it clear what we are doing here? Okay, let's go to the next page. So now we are adding some perturbation again in the form as we did before, epsilon ht Vx, some potential Vx, some time dependent factor ht. So that means that our generator is now changing. So earlier we had some equilibrium generator L0. Now we have some correction. So here if you see that we just have to add one term with this u prime x, which is epsilon hs v prime x, and we can just read off what this change in the generator is. So that's L1, and this is simply the form of L1 operating on some observable O. So this is switched on at time t equal to 0. So we can write again formally what happens to OT. This is in presence of epsilon, I forgot to write it. So this is simply exponential integral of the new generator L integrated up to time t. L0 was time independent, so simply L0t plus, because Hs is time dependent, we have to integrate over 0 to t. So this formalism is probably familiar to all of you from time dependent perturbation in quantum mechanics. This is very similar, structurally almost identical. So what we will do now, because we want to see what is the linear response, how OT changes the linear coefficient in epsilon. So we will simply expand this operator as Dyson expansion. I'm not going to derive it, it's very tedious, but you can find it in a lot of places. So I'll just quote the result. What happens is that, so the first term of course is simply L0t, so that gives us OT in equilibrium. And then we have one time integral and one integral over the phase space with respect to rho 0s, because this average was with respect to rho 0s. An important point is that we have this SL0. S is the intermediate time. So basically L1 drops at all times S. So L1 drops at all times S, and it's sandwiched by SL0 and L0t minus S. So here you can see that so we start from time t equal to 0, and then we are translated to some time t, intermediate time t, with the unperturbed generator. Then we have L1, and then we translate further to the final time t with still L0. So this now we can go further. What we can do is that this exponential SL0, we can of course pull it here. It will just become the forward generator, which operating on N0 just gives 0. So exponential would just give rho 0. So finally we have a form which is again two integrals, time integral and the phase space integral, rho 0, L1 exponential this factor. So first of all, you already see that so here you can read off the response function, right? Because if you remember the definition, the susceptibility was an integral, time integral with Hs and RTS. So this is our RTS, this integral here, and you already see that it's a function of t minus x. But we can go further. We can take this L1, operate on L0, rho 0, and it becomes just the adjoint. And now we come to why we were using overdamped. So explicitly we can calculate this L1 dagger for overdamped case, and it turns out to be simply minus beta rho 0, the equilibrium distribution, L operating on Vx. Okay. Yes. So is it clear? Because the next step is a bit more tedious. So is it clear what we did here? Okay, I'll just quickly summarize. What we did is that we wrote a time evolution for the observable itself in terms of some backward generator, and then we expanded that backward generator in terms of our perturbation strength epsilon, and then we ended up as I mean, with an expansion for, I mean, expression for chi in terms of L1, the perturbing part of the generator, and L0, which was the equilibrium generator. And here, after that, we use the explicit form for overtime diffusion, and we saw that this L1 dagger operating on rho 0 is giving me LV. So our chi t is simply minus integral this LVS OT. Okay, this is a 2-point correlation. So LVS is some operator, L operating on VS and OT, but we can go further. What we can use is that so this is equilibrium. This correlation is in equilibrium, which means that it's time reversal invariant. So we can simply write LVS OT as LVT OS. So we just exchange the 2 times because it's time reversal invariant. And then from the definition, you can show, I mean, we can discuss later, but from the definition, you can show that this is nothing but DDT, because you remember L was like a time evolution operator. So this is DDT. And again, we can use the time reversal invariance. So S and T we can exchange. And DDT we already saw before, because this is a function of T minus S, it gives us minus DDS, and we end up with the familiar form of Kubo formula that we introduced before. So we simply have integral over time and the time dependent amplitude and derivative of VS OT. So this is a formal derivation of Kubo formula in the context of overtime diffusion. You can do it in other systems also, but we will not do it. I mean, it's the same strategy always. Okay, so once more I'll pause, and then with some quick comments I'll just end.
L is the total, like L0 plus L1.
Yes, sorry, no, I'm so sorry. So this is L0. This is a typo. This is L0. This is the unperturbed L, because if you remember, we had this L. This is the form of L, and this is what we end up with here. So L is simply the unperturbed thing here. So this correlation that we have, so this correlation does not know anything about the perturbation directly, except which potential we are perturbing with. So this is simply L0. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So now let's see. There is actually some thermodynamic interpretation for this formula. Let's. Yes, is there a question? I don't. Okay, so let's look back at this formula. So let's do this time integral partially. So what we have is that there is a term which is simply V at time t, I mean VT at time t, and V at time 0, the boundary term. And then there is one term which is integral over Hs dot V prime x. So this term is actually like the work done by the perturbing force V prime along a certain trajectory. And this is nothing but a change in energy of, I mean, due to the perturbation. So because it's a change in energy from time t equal to 0 to final time t. So this whole thing is correlated with the observable OT. And here, as we identified, this as change of energy, and this is work done by the perturbation. So the whole thing is actually the entropy generated by the perturbation. Change in energy minus the work done. So that's the entropy generated along a particular trajectory. And then we average it, we correlate it with the observable OT and then average over the equilibrium distribution. So in some sense, we can say that in equilibrium, the perturbation, the response to a perturbation is given by the correlation of the observable with the entropy generated by the perturbation. Okay, so in that sense, it's a thermodynamic formula. We are talking about entropy. Entropy is of course a thermodynamic thing. So what we will see from tomorrow is that, let me repeat. So equilibrium linear response for static observables, we are talking about, state observables. So O at final time t is entropy. That is, it's totally thermodynamic in that sense. So what we will see from tomorrow is that as soon as we go away from any of these terms, so if we go out of equilibrium, if we go beyond linear response, and if we go for generic path observables, this formula will not hold anymore. So in equilibrium, non-thermodynamic aspects are completely irrelevant. We did not talk about waiting times or how, I mean, even it doesn't depend on the friction, etc. explicitly. And we will see that once we go away from this particular scenario of equilibrium linear response, these non-thermodynamic aspects would become very crucial. So I'll just end with this comment, and tomorrow we'll start with non-equilibrium response. So now, yeah, questions.
Yeah, thanks, Urna. So are there questions? I mean, I had one quick question. I mean, so if you go to this derivation of the linear response,
yes,
yeah, this one. Yes. So in this step, I mean, what is the crucial step in? So basically, I guess the problem is L0 and L1 do not necessarily commute, right?
Do not necessarily commute, yes.
So what is the main trick that one uses to go from?
Go from?
Like in the derivation,
so this expansion?
Yeah.
This is just Dyson expansion as we do in quantum mechanics. So if we have this time evolution operator,
okay.
In the interaction picture, it's simply this, right? We have the interacting, the interaction, the perturbing Hamiltonian in between, and then it is sandwiched from the time evolution operator from both sides.
Right. Okay.
So here we have not, I mean, up to this, we have not assumed anything. We have not even assumed that it is equilibrium, not even stationary. In the next step, what we assume is that rho 0 is stationary, which gives us this e to the power L dagger rho 0 is equal to rho 0. So basically what we will see tomorrow is that this, I mean, up to this, it is even valid for non-equilibrium. And for non-equilibrium stationary state, we can still write this form. Next, what we assume to go to the specific form of formula. Next, we use the equilibrium form, exponential minus beta ux. That will, of course, not be true for stationary non-equilibrium.
Okay, are there other questions?
Where is the...
Okay, maybe we'll just wait for 2 minutes or 1 minute if people can think of.
Okay, yes. So this part, of course, yeah, there is somebody.
The question is not exactly related to the contents, but is this presentation file going to be uploaded in the web page or somewhere?
This, of course, I don't know.
So Urna, can you share this file with us? Then we'll put it on the website.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Yeah, so we'll put it on the it will become appear in the talks page.
Sorry, I missed the last comment.
In the website, it will appear in the talks page.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I think there's a question from Orgo maybe.
Okay, yes. Does the same conclusion hold in the underdamped case? Yes, it does. You can explicitly calculate. So what I am going to suggest is that because I mean online it's very tedious to do all the calculations. So if you just try to do it for the underdamped case, just a single underdamped particle. You can find the expression for the generator easily and see that this actually holds. For although there is a catch there, because in underdamped there is velocity. So when we are talking about time reversal, then of course the velocities also have to reverse its sign. Remember that, and then.
Okay, there's a question. 2 questions. So Sandeep, first question.
Yes, ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes.
So in the slide what you are showing right now, so there is a time reversal invariance, right? I mean, you are calculating some expectation value of LVS yes. and O. Yes. My question is, it is coming from the overdamped Langevin equation. That overdamped Langevin equation itself not time reversal invariant, isn't it? I mean, if you change that t to minus t, what should I say? The structure of the equation is not going to remain the same.
No. So what I mean by time reversal invariance is that the equation itself is not, but it's in a statistical sense. So probability that a forward trajectory, some trajectory. Suppose we have some trajectory xs from 0 to t.
Yes.
Right? So x1, x2, x3, some sequence of positions. So probability of that trajectory is exactly same as the probability of the reverse trajectory.
Okay. I mean, can you just interpret it physically? I mean, I'm not being able to imagine it. I mean, how it is happening when the equation itself is not time reversal.
No, so again, I mean, we are talking about in a statistical sense. So suppose you let's talk of a overdone particle same as random walk. So suppose we have one single random walker. Okay. So we have a certain sequence. So starting from x, it first jump to x plus 1, then maybe back to x again, then to x minus 1. So this is a certain trajectory, right? So in equilibrium, if we try to write the probability of this trajectory, it will be simply the probability of each jump times the waiting time. The waiting probability. And if you try to write the probability of the reverse path, you will see that it's exactly same when the jump rates are equal.
Yes.
Okay? So time reversal invariance is in terms of
okay. Got it. Yes.
So because, okay, the point is that here the average, when I say time reversal invariant, what I mean is that in equilibrium, so this is an average over all
possible realization of the noise.
Yes, all possible realization of the noise or all possible path weights. So in equilibrium basically is defined by the time reversal invariance.
And ma'am, when even in quantum mechanics, when we talk about the that thing, I'm forgetting the name. Oh God. Anyway, so my point is that whenever you are talking about the linear response theory, is there any condition of that epsilon term? I mean,
it has to be small enough.
For example, in first order perturbation theory, or let's say in the second order perturbation theory, there's a condition. I mean, I'm not being able to remember it properly. There's some ratio between the perturbation term and the
So the point is that in general, of course, this OT in epsilon, you can write it as a full series in epsilon, right? There's a zeroth term, there's an epsilon term, epsilon square term.
Yes.
So we are talking about the coefficient of the epsilon term in a particular physical scenario. In which regime, how small epsilon has to be, it of course means that the first term has to be dominating compared to the second term and higher order term.
Yes.
Right? So that will depend on the particular system. Where, in which regime, what is the actual value of epsilon, whether it's 0.1 or 0.01 or 2, up to which we can apply this formula. That depends on the specific system and the value of chi and chi2, I mean the higher order terms.
Okay.
But here what we are doing is that formally, so we are saying that there is a regime in epsilon where you can, where this thing holds, and that's it. You can think of this as, formally or some sort of Taylor expansion. So when you write a Taylor expansion of a function around some point x naught, of course, up to which you can use the linear approximation as a good approximation for the function. That depends on the higher derivatives, right?
Yes.
So it's just that.
Thank you.
Indranil.
Okay, ma'am, I have a question that for the Einstein case, you have said that there is a relation between d equal to some t by gamma. Hello?
Yes, let me go. Yeah. Let me go there. Yes, here I am.
So the T by gamma and T is the temperature.
Yes.
And this time the term gamma x dot is for the equilibrium case, that for the equation of motion.
Sorry, what?
In the previous slide, if
so,
you go,
yes.
that is the equation of this gamma x dot in the equation of motion is for the equilibrium case.
What do you mean the equilibrium case? No, we just applied an external force, right? So what I said is that this gamma and this particular relation between the friction and the noise guarantees that without any non-conservative forces, this dynamics would take the particle to an equilibrium distribution.
Yeah, okay.
Right? But the equation itself, once we have written the equation, then we can add other terms which actually would take it out of equilibrium. That is okay. Does that answer your question?
But by changing the gamma, by lowering gamma, can we go to the non-equilibrium?
No. Why are you asking that?
No, I'm asking that suppose this term is not present there, that is gamma x dot. So
okay. So if there is so gamma equal to 0 is a singular limit. It's not. Lowering gamma and gamma equal to 0. That would not be the same. So you can see, so what happens is that if you just get rid of this gamma x term, suppose there is no potential, there is no epsilon. So you write this equation as h double dot equal to 2 gamma t eta, just this term. So if you calculate the average kinetic energy, this equation you can integrate directly, right? V dot equal to this, V you can integrate. So if you calculate the average kinetic energy, just half V square average, and you will see that that increases with time. Okay, so that's what I meant. So gamma going to 0 and gamma equal to 0 are very different things.
Okay, and one also very small question that in the first case for random walk in a 1D lattice, I equal to 1 to L. This is if the case be periodic, then there will be any change.
Okay. So first of all, if it is periodic, then I cannot add a potential like that, because the potential would not be single valued. At the boundary, there will be a jump. So I wanted to make sure that everything I say is accurate. So if you have a ring, a linear, you cannot write a potential which is linear, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yes. So the potential will not be single valued. So that's why here. And then of course I could have taken L going to infinity, but for on an infinite, I mean the full integer line, this is of course not normalized. So that's why a finite lattice.
Okay, thank you.
Prashant had a question.
What happens in the free diffusion case?
Which free diffusion case? Just x dot equal to eta.
If you don't have confining potential, then we don't have equilibrium.
Technically true, but on the other hand, there you still have the time reversal invariance. So if you talk about xt minus x0, everything is fine. So we cannot.
What did you say? I didn't hear properly.
Yes. So what I said is that even though there is no potential, we cannot write a Gibbs weight for the equilibrium, but the trajectories would still be time reversal invariant. Okay. And if we talk about in terms of xt minus, then everything holds. I'm hearing a lot. I don't know if you can hear me. Hello. So there are some chats. Akash. Yes. Sure. It's correct. So we are assuming that everything is good. There is no divergence. So Akash, does that answer your question? Okay.
But can one prove the convergence? Like for some systems, I guess.
For some system, maybe yes. For example, I mean, if we are talking about just a potential perturbation, and if we know that with this potential, some epsilon Vx, the whole thing, I mean, the static thing is normalizable, then of course at all times, I guess it would be converging. That's the simplest example, but.
So Urna, I mean, this question about time, the fact that equations don't have time reversal invariance. So I guess for a stochastic system, maybe one should look at the definition of time reversal invariance. Maybe it should be either something like detailed balance or this Kolmogorov condition, right?
Yeah.
Which is related to path trajectories.
Yes. And also, I mean, we have to define. So here there is eta, of course, but if we have other time-dependent forces, so we have to define properly what we mean by time reversal invariance. We need to we need to always reverse the protocol also to consistently define this thing. For example, for run and tumble, I mean, we have this sigma variable, but okay, I mean that maybe is later. So one thing I would like to ask is that was the pace okay, or was it too fast, too slow? Everything you knew already. So this is for the students, of course.
It's little fast, ma'am. I mean,
okay. So from tomorrow, because that's an important information. So Jitendra is asking something.
Yes, Jitendra.
So for the, I mean, if we are near critical point instead of at critical point, is the linear response still valid, or do we have to consider higher order terms?
Depending on the, I mean, formally yes.
Okay.
I think technically yes, but practically if you see still, so if you are away from criticality and you are expanding in a variable which is not your order parameter variable, then everything should be okay.
Okay, for order parameter, there will be some problem, is it?
Then of course you are in a regime. I mean, technically it should.
Okay, and just another question.
So this is like, so let me just finish. So suppose you have a function square root of x, and you are expanding around some point x naught. I mean, not 0, but something else, right?
Okay.
So then, I mean, just 0 plus something. Then formally you have a linear expansion. You have a linear term. Whether you are able to see it practically in some experiments, that's a different question. Probably not.
Okay. That means, I mean, the linear response is valid. I mean, you don't need the higher order corrections.
No. So at criticality, you mean?
Not exactly, just near critical point.
Yes, near critical point, you can write a formal linear and higher order expansion. I mean, it could be that for some systems that particular exponent, I mean that particular coefficient goes to 0. We will see some examples probably tomorrow or day after. But formally, yes, you can write a linear expansion as long as you are not exactly at the critical point. You can.
Yeah, and just one sub question. So experimentally, all of this is valid, in the sense it's verified.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
So Ion is asking, if the epsilon is small but the potential is not linear in X, then how do things change? You can just write the formal. I mean, we saw it's a correlation. Ion, can you hear or?
I
yes.
think he can hear, but he can't.
Okay, so yeah, so we have the expression in terms of correlation with V and O. So if it is not linear but just some quadratic, we just calculate the correlation with that variable. Sorry, with that potential. So instead of x square, we will have x cubed.
No, Orgho had one question. For Kubo relation and thermodynamic interpretation, is white noise necessary?
For Kubo relation, no, because Kubo relation was derived even in the context of quantum mechanics. So, and also for we saw that it's true for random walk, etc. For jump processes, this is no white noise. This is very nonlinear things. For thermodynamic interpretation, also no. We will see tomorrow. So as soon, does it answer your question? So as soon as we are in the jump process picture, that already takes off your objection, right? There is no white noise.
Prashant, did you have a question, or your hand is raised from earlier?
Oh, okay, it was raised from earlier, but let me ask one question. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so like it's a generic question that you were discussing. So at the level of Langevin equation, is it possible to somehow see this time reversal symmetry, like not in terms of the propagators, but in terms of the
no. You see, because I mean we have a noise, right? So the noise by definition means that its value at some time t is not deterministic. So with a noise, I mean every trajectory would have a different value of noise. So what do you mean by at the level of Langevin equation? So once we have a noise there, it means that we can have so only, I mean we can talk about something concretely only in the statistical sense then.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe in terms of averages, but you can anyway like write that.
No, not only averages. No, it's more than averages. It's the full probability is same. It's not only average, right? That's a bit more general. So we have a certain trajectory, just a sequence of positions. Think about the random walk again. Okay, so we have a certain sequence of jumps. The particle jumped right, left, right, something. And the reverse trajectory we can just retrace. We have the positions, we just retrace the trajectory. And what it says, the probability of this forward trajectory is equal to probability of the reverse trajectory as long as the jump rates left and right are equal. Okay. It does not only say that the net distance covered, the average distance covered in this trajectory is same for left and right. That's not, it's not same, it's minus, but it's more than that. Yes, so Langevin equation, of course, is a linear approximation. So we will not consider the case where the Langevin equation changes. When we will talk about nonlinear response, Ion, this is in answer to your question. When we will talk about nonlinear response, we will keep Langevin equation as the starting point. The Langevin equation remains linear, but even then, we will see that there are nonlinear effects in the observable. So you were asking about the derivation of Langevin equation itself. That also in some cases, for example, if you have time dependent scenario, so you can or memory in the system, then of course this picture is not valid. The Langevin equation changes. We'll have higher, different kind of terms for friction, noise kernel, etc. But we will not go there. So when I said nonlinear response, I meant we keep the linear equation, but see the effect in an observable of higher order in epsilon. Shondeep has raised hand.
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, in the previous slide, maybe not the previous slide, you said something about the detail valence condition for the random walk situation. This one.
Yes.
Here you have written that P equal to Q times e to the power beta e. Where did you get that from?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So basically what I said is that we have some potential Vx now. And when we add this potential, when we add this perturbation, the rates should change, right? And how would they change? They should depend on epsilon, but how would they change? Yes. So what I am demanding here is that these new rates should take me to the equilibrium with the distribution exponential minus beta Vx. Okay? Plus beta Vx here because of this minus sign. So I'm demanding that the equilibrium, the dynamics is detail balance with respect to the new potential. And that, if you explicitly calculate so the jump rate would be from x to x plus 1, and then delta v would be simply exponential beta epsilon, and that gives us this. But we will see a generalization of this tomorrow. It doesn't have to be a full equilibrium, but there is something called local detail balance, but that will come tomorrow.
Is there any way to just by looking at the dynamics of the system, or just let's say by just looking at the differential equation and all, can we predict that whether the system obeys the detail balance or not? What is the algorithm to check that the detail balance condition is satisfied or it's violated? What are the conditions to check?
So detail balance is, do you know what it means, the detail balance condition directly?
The definition of it, any process can be divided into elementary process. In equilibrium, all these elementary processes are sort of nullified by their reverse processes, and there is a mathematical condition as well.
Right. So from the Langevin, if you write the propagator, so the probability of a certain change, t to t plus delta t, and that should actually satisfy the, probability at x times the propagator should be the reverse this thing. So that is the formal detail balance description for Langevin picture. But actually you can, I think there is even a better way. So for example, in this equation, the Langevin equation that we wrote, so essentially this gamma, the relation between the friction and the noise strength, yes, that also guarantees detail balance.
Okay.
So it says basically if there is no non-conservative force, there is no time-dependent force. If you let the system evolve with this dynamics with some potential which is normalizable, etc., then you will end up in the equilibrium distribution.
Okay. And ma'am, maybe in some of the previous slides, you also mentioned that when we were taking the averages, we are talking about the full averages. I mean, all possible initial conditions and all possible realization of the noise, right? And you said that when I mean, we'll pick up the initial conditions, we can take it from the equilibrium configuration, or let's say the non-equilibrium configuration. You mentioned something like this. I might be wrong. I mean,
at the very beginning.
Hey, very beginning, yes.
Yes.
You mentioned both. Yes, initial condition. What do you mean by non-equilibrium initial conditions?
Okay. So it's the full. I mean, it's not just a state, but the full condition. So I mean, there are time correlations, etc. Everything is included in this case. Or it could be just you put up just with some delta function or something like that. So when we say non-equilibrium, we don't. I mean. Okay, so one thing would be that if we have a potential, okay, and the distribution is not satisfying Gibbs-Boltzmann form, okay. Suppose that is sure shot non-equilibrium, okay. But on the other hand, having a Gibbs-Boltzmann distribution does not necessarily mean that the system is in equilibrium. We also need to have the time correlations. I mean, the proper time reversal, etc.
Okay. I mean, that means, I mean, the statement what you just made, I mean, that means if you have a Boltzmann type distribution and that does not mean the system is in equilibrium.
I mean, there could be cases. I mean, don't make it too generalized. So if we have a particle in a potential and velocity, I mean, just ordinary Hamiltonian, and if we have a distribution exponential minus beta h, then of course it means equilibrium. But suppose we don't know about the the energy, etc. Just so, for example, in 1D, if we have some distribution or in other words, let's say it this way. So suppose we are given a distribution, we can always construct some potential by taking log, etc. Right?
Yes.
But that need not be the physical potential.
Yes.
So then it will not. So there are some specific examples. For example, there's a paper by Luke and Godrej where they showed that in Ising model you can devise like almost I think a whole set of dynamics which gives you the stationary measure same as the equilibrium measure, the Gibbs measure, but the dynamics is clearly out of equilibrium.
Okay. That means in those cases, the detail balance condition is
violated. Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so maybe we'll. I think it's time to stop. So we can continue tomorrow. So I guess people should. I mean, we'll put this the notes on the website, and it's a good idea if people actually work through all the steps. I think that. Some of which were not complete, so you can work, and tomorrow morning maybe you can, before the lecture, if you have doubts you can ask.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay.
There are not too many questions.
Okay. So maybe I'll just read them and then tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So thanks, Urna, and thanks everyone. It looks like things have worked out okay today.
Yes.
So we meet again. So today the next lecture is at 3:30, and then Urna's lecture is again at 11 tomorrow. Okay. So see you everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.